What on earth is happening here? Those were the first words that exploded from millionaire Jonathan Hale's mouth as he dropped his suitcase in the doorway of his luxury penthouse kitchen. He had returned home a full day earlier than planned. The elevator ride up to the 39th floor had been silent, cold, almost eerie. Jonathan's schedule was usually so tight, so rigidly controlled, that coming back early felt like stepping out of his own character. But the conference had ended ahead of schedule, and for once, he wanted to surprise his son. He wanted to be a father. At least, that's what he told himself. But the moment he walked through the door, he froze. Not because the lights were on. Not because someone had forgotten to lock the door. But because of what, or rather, who he saw. There, standing by the marble counter, was his 10-year-old son, Ethan, laughing. Yes, laughing, while cracking eggs into a bowl. It wasn't a small smile or a polite giggle. It was a full, bright, belly-deep laugh that echoed off the expensive walls that usually held nothing but silence. A sound Jonathan hadn't heard in nearly 3 years. And beside him stood a young black woman in a simple gray uniform. She was guiding his hands gently, her voice soft, warm, patient. She had flour on her cheek, eggshells on the counter, a towel slung over her shoulder, and a smile that looked like it came straight from the sun. A smile Jonathan hadn't seen in his home for years. Jonathan's voice thundered again. "Who are you? And why is my son cooking?" The woman straightened up immediately, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression shifting from warm to startled. "My name is Maya, sir," she said softly. "Mrs. Coleman from the agency sent me. I started yesterday." Her tone was respectful, but not fearful. Calm, but not timid. As if she understood his anger, but wasn't intimidated by it. Jonathan, however, wasn't calm. In fact, inside his chest, something was boiling. Jonathan hadn't approved a new maid. He hadn't interviewed her. He hadn't checked her references. No one was allowed near his son without his permission. No one. It was the one rule every staff member understood clearly. Because Ethan wasn't an ordinary child. At least, not after everything that had happened. And yet, Ethan looked happy. Happier than he had in months. Maybe even years. His cheeks were flushed. His eyes sparkled. He was moving around the kitchen with an energy Jonathan barely recognized. He looked like a child who had a friend. A child who felt safe. But Jonathan ignored that for now. He was a man who demanded control. Control over his household. Control over his employees. Control over his time. Control over his emotions. Especially the ones he didn't want to face. And this, whatever this was, felt like a direct attack on that control. He pointed at the bowl. "Ethan, step away from the stove. You know you're not allowed near it." The boy stiffened. Instantly, the laughter vanished, like someone had switched it off. His tiny shoulders tensed, and he took a step back, not toward his father, but behind Maya, as if she was a shield, as if she was the safe one. That made something twist inside Jonathan's chest. Something he didn't like. Maya gently rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder and lowered herself a little so she could speak to him eye to eye. "It's okay," she whispered to him. "You didn't do anything wrong." Jonathan clenched his jaw. Who gave her the right to say that? Who gave her the right to comfort his son? Who gave her the right to act like she understood him better than his own father did? Jonathan took a breath, a slow, controlled, corporate-style breath, and addressed the woman again. "Mrs. Coleman had no authority to hire anyone without speaking to me," he said sharply. "So, I need an explanation." Maya nodded politely. "I understand, sir. She told me your previous maid quit suddenly." That much was true. The previous maid had left after only 1 week. Before that, another had left after 4 days. Before that, one lasted 2 hours. She walked out after Ethan threw a spoon at the wall during a panic attack. But Jonathan didn't want to think about that. "My staff," he said coldly, "should have informed me of the situation." "They tried, sir," Maya replied evenly. "But you were in meetings all day, according to your assistant." Jonathan paused. He hated that she was right. He hated even more that she wasn't intimidated by him. And most of all, he hated the sudden realization that for 48 hours he had no idea what had been happening in his own home. Ethan peeked out from behind her. His eyes were wide, uncertain, almost pleading. Jonathan tried to soften his voice. "Ethan, why were you cooking?" The boy's lips parted as if he wanted to answer, but no words came out. His hands fidgeted nervously with the hem of his shirt. Maya stepped forward slightly. "He asked me if he could help," she explained gently. "He told me he wanted to make pancakes for you. He said you like them." Jonathan's breath hitched. He hadn't eaten pancakes in years. His wife, Ethan's mother, used to make them every Sunday morning. After she died, the tradition disappeared, along with most of the warmth in their home. Jonathan looked at his son again, really looked at him. Ethan's small fingers were speckled with flour. His hair was messy. His cheeks were pink from laughter he wasn't supposed to have. And suddenly Jonathan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Guilt. Deep, heavy guilt. Because when was the last time he had stood in this kitchen with his son? When was the last time he taught him anything? When was the last time Ethan smiled like that because of him? Jonathan swallowed the lump forming in his throat. He straightened his suit jacket, lifted his chin, and forced himself back into the armor he always wore. Power, control, distance. "This won't happen again," he said stiffly. "I'll speak to the agency myself." But even as he said the words, something inside him whispered the truth. He wasn't upset because Maya had broken the rules. He was upset because she had done something he couldn't. She made his son feel alive. Ethan hid behind Maya, lowering his head. "Ethan," Jonathan said, failing, to soften his tone, "why are you in the kitchen? You know you're not supposed to." "He wanted to help," Maya answered gently. "He asked me this morning if he could learn how to make pancakes for you." Jonathan blinked. "For me?" Ethan nodded shyly. That single gesture, small, timid, almost apologetic, hit Jonathan harder than any business deal, any boardroom confrontation, any moment of stress he had faced in his elite corporate world. Jonathan felt something twist in his chest. A deep, heavy ache. Because it had been years, literal years, since Ethan had done anything for him. Ever since Ethan's mother passed away 3 years earlier, the boy had withdrawn into a quiet world of his own. It was as if someone had dimmed the light inside him, leaving only shadows. He rarely smiled. He hardly spoke. He barely responded to affection. Therapists came and went. Teachers reported no progress. Specialists gave long, complicated explanations filled with charts, terms, and possibilities. But nothing changed. The mansion felt like a museum, silent, cold, empty. Or worse, haunted. Every corner whispered memory. Every room held the ghost of someone who used to make breakfast on Sundays, hum old love songs, and kiss Ethan's forehead before school. Jonathan tried to bury the pain in work, emails, meetings, overnight flights, back-to-back conferences. He convinced himself that providing money was the same as providing love. But his son had slipped away from him like sand through open fingers. Until today. Because now his son looked different, lighter, alive. Jonathan stared at Maya. "How did you convince him to do that?" Maya hesitated, not nervously, but thoughtfully, as if she wanted to choose her words with care. "I didn't convince him, sir." Jonathan frowned. "Then what happened?" She took a small breath. "That first night, he couldn't sleep." Jonathan stiffened. He knew what that meant. Every night since the funeral, Ethan had battled nightmares. Many nights, the staff found him curled in a hallway corner or under the staircase, clutching a blanket, shaking silently. He never called for Jonathan, never knocked on his door. He had learned not to expect comfort. Maya continued quietly. "I saw him sitting on the floor, alone, hugging his knees. I didn't want to scare him, so I sat at the other end of the hallway and started talking." Talking. Jonathan echoed. She nodded. "I told him stories about when I was little. Silly things. Like how I used to burn toast, or how my brothers tricked me into eating a spoonful of salt because I thought it was sugar." She chuckled softly at the memory. He listened. Really listened. Jonathan imagined it. His son sitting in the dim hallway. Maya sitting a few feet away, not forcing conversation, not demanding responses, not asking questions he never knew how to answer. Just talking, just existing beside him, offering comfort in the simplest form. He didn't say anything at first, Maya continued. But when I got up to leave, he looked at me and asked, her voice softened. He asked if I could stay. Jonathan's throat tightened. His son asked a stranger to stay. A woman he had known for hours. His son had never asked him to stay. Not once. Not since the day the hospital lights went dark and they both walked out holding grief that neither knew how to carry. Jonathan looked away sharply, eyes stinging with a heat he did not dare show. He stared at the refrigerator handle instead, cold steel, straight and perfect, unlike the mess of emotions twisting inside him. He cleared his throat. He asked you to stay? Maya nodded gently. I said yes. So I sat with him until he fell asleep. That's all. That's all. 2 small words. But they held everything Jonathan had failed to give. Presence, warmth, comfort, humanity. Jonathan gripped the edge of the island counter to steady himself. He had spent thousands on therapists, tens of thousands on child psychologists. He had bought toys, devices, tutors, specialized programs. But none of it worked. And this woman, this maid he never approved, had reached his son with nothing more than stories and kindness. His pride and insecurity wrestled violently in his chest. Why did he want to make pancakes? Jonathan forced himself to ask. Maya smiled softly. Because, he said, it was your favorite breakfast. He wanted to surprise you when you came home. Jonathan's breath caught. The memory hit him like a punch. Sunday mornings. The kitchen filled with the scent of vanilla. His wife flipping pancakes, while singing along to old jazz music. Ethan sitting on the counter swinging his legs, stealing strawberry slices when he thought no one was watching. And Jonathan pretending to check emails while secretly watching them with a quiet smile. He thought Ethan had forgotten. He was wrong. He remembers? Jonathan asked hoarsely. Of course he does, Maya said gently. Kids remember the good things, even when life tries to push them down. Jonathan opened his mouth, then closed it. There were no words, not ones he was brave enough to say. He looked at Ethan, his small frame, his trembling fingers, his uncertain eyes searching his father's face, waiting to see if he was angry, disappointed, or just too busy. Jonathan took a step toward him. Ethan flinched. Just a tiny flinch. But it shattered Jonathan inside. He had become someone his child feared, and Maya had become someone he trusted. Jonathan swallowed the painful realization, forcing down the guilt that threatened to choke him. Thank you, he whispered to Maya, though the words weren't loud enough for either of them to hear clearly. His voice broke too much to repeat them. That evening, Jonathan called Maya into his office. The room was immaculate, polished mahogany, floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights shimmering like a galaxy outside. But even in all that grandeur, the air felt heavy, almost stifling. He remained standing behind his massive desk, a power move, something he had perfected in boardrooms and negotiations all his life. The stance projected control, authority, dominance. But tonight, it felt hollow. I didn't approve your hiring, he said flatly, his tone clipped, sharp like a whip. And I don't know how my staff decided this without my consent. Maya kept her posture straight, calm, collected. Her uniform was neat, her hands folded in front of her, and she didn't flinch under the weight of his authority. If you want me to leave, sir, she said softly, I understand. I just hope you won't be angry with Ethan. I'm not angry with him. Jonathan snapped before he could stop himself. The words hung in the air, loud, unexpected. Even to him, they felt alien. Jonathan rarely admitted emotions, especially when it came to business or people. But tonight, the truth had a way of surfacing, uninvited. That surprised them both. Maya blinked, her lips pressed into a thin line of caution. Jonathan could almost see her calculating whether his sudden outburst meant danger or change. For a moment, silence sat between them, thick, almost suffocating, yet charged with something neither had planned for. The city lights outside seemed to fade as Jonathan stared down at the polished surface of his desk, gathering the fragments of his pride and confusion. Then he asked quietly, almost too softly for his own liking, "What did you do? Why is he suddenly different?" Maya lowered her eyes. She didn't rush. She didn't justify herself. She simply spoke truth, calm and unwavering. "Children don't need much, Mr. Hale. Just someone who sees them. Someone who listens. Someone who doesn't treat them like an inconvenience." Jonathan stiffened. His hands, which had been gripping the edge of the desk, tightened involuntarily. Something about her words cut him deeper than any boardroom defeat, deeper than a market crash or a failed acquisition. He swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. "Are you implying I don't care about my son?" Maya shook her head gently. "No. I'm saying you care so much you forgot how to show it." The words hit him harder than any business loss ever had. His chest felt tight. His vision blurred slightly, not from anger or frustration, but from the raw, piercing weight of truth. Maya wasn't attacking him. She wasn't criticizing him. She was holding up a mirror. And for the first time in years, Jonathan saw what he had been missing. For years, he had assumed that providing Ethan with everything money could buy, tutors, therapists, the finest clothes, the latest gadgets, a mansion with every possible luxury, was enough. He thought that being a provider was the same as being a parent. That protection, provision, and discipline equaled love. But Maya's words stripped all of that away. What he had failed to realize was painfully simple. Ethan didn't need things. He needed presence, attention, validation, love that wasn't transactional, love that didn't come with conditions or schedules. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to insist that he had always cared, that he had done everything he could. But the truth settled in like a stone in his chest. He couldn't. Not this time. Not when his son had smiled at someone else in a way he hadn't smiled at him in years. Before she could turn to leave, Jonathan asked one more question, his voice dropping, hesitant yet desperate. "Why did you sit with him that night? You weren't obligated. You didn't have to." Maya smiled softly, but there was no arrogance in it. No triumph. Just understanding. "Because I know what it feels like to be lonely in a big house." Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. Lonely. The word echoed in his mind, bouncing off the marble walls, ricocheting between his memories of late nights at the office and silent mornings in the mansion where Ethan sat alone, waiting for a father who was never there. He realized painfully that he had been absent in ways that money couldn't fix. He had thought that wealth equaled care, that protection equaled love, that providing for every physical need of his son could fill the emptiness that grief had carved into both their hearts. But now he understood it couldn't. Not until anyone, gave Ethan the gift he had withheld: time, attention, and a human presence that said, "You matter to me." Jonathan felt a lump in his throat. His eyes stung. He turned slightly, as if looking anywhere but at Maya, because he didn't know how to confront the flood of emotions threatening to break his composed exterior. He swallowed again, trying to restore his usual control. But control felt meaningless now. It was irrelevant compared to what was happening in the other room, where Ethan waited, hoping that his father could finally see him. For the first time, Jonathan understood that Maya had done what he hadn't been able to do, had reached the part of his son that no amount of money or schedule or discipline could touch. She had listened. She had stayed. She had cared. Simply, gently, patiently. Jonathan realized in that heavy, surreal moment that he had hired someone who understood his son more deeply than he did. The thought both frightened and humbled him. Frightened because it revealed how far he had fallen short. Humbled because it opened a door, one he had thought permanently closed, to a chance at redemption. He took a step forward, almost instinctively, though he didn't know what he was going to say. Maya watched him, waiting patiently, her eyes kind but expectant, as if she could sense the storm of emotions he was barely holding together. Jonathan's voice trembled slightly as he spoke. I want to understand. I want to be better for him. And I think I need your help." Maya's lips curved into a small, encouraging smile. She nodded, and in that silent gesture, Jonathan realized something extraordinary. Hope was possible. Connection was possible. Love, real, present, human love, was possible. And for the first time in years, Jonathan didn't feel the need to control everything. He just wanted to learn. Because he had finally seen the truth. Care isn't about power or money or authority. Care is about presence. It's about being there when it matters, in ways that cannot be bought. And Maya, she had given him exactly that, a mirror, a guide, and a gentle reminder that the hardest, most valuable work in life was not in the boardroom. It was here, in this room, in this house, with his son. Jonathan exhaled slowly, letting the tension leave his shoulders for the first time in years. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in far too long. Hope. The next morning, Jonathan woke up to a smell that immediately stopped him mid-step. Warm, sweet, familiar, comforting. Pancakes. The aroma drifted through the marble halls of the Hale penthouse, curling around the high ceilings, slipping under the doors, and tugging at memories Jonathan thought he had buried. He rubbed his eyes and sat up in bed, unsure if he was dreaming or if someone had finally broken the quiet spell that had hung over his home for years. His mind raced. The mansion was usually silent at this hour. Ethan usually slept alone, and the staff were still preparing breakfast for Jonathan's routine corporate schedule. But this smell, rich, golden, and slightly buttery, was different. Real, personal, intentional. He hurried down the staircase, bare feet tapping against the polished wood, heart thudding in a way it hadn't in years. He opened the kitchen door and froze. There was Ethan. Flour dusted his hair like snow. His small shirt was smeared with batter. His cheeks were rosy from excitement and the warmth of the stove. And he was holding a plate of pancakes, shaped into a crooked heart. "For you," Ethan whispered. Jonathan's chest tightened. He felt the world tilt, as if the gravity in that room was determined by a child's gesture rather than by any boardroom power he had ever commanded. He nearly dropped to his knees. His son spoke. He actually spoke. Jonathan's eyes burned, moisture pooling as he tried to keep his voice steady. "Thank you, buddy. They look amazing." Ethan's eyes widened. This was a reaction he hadn't expected. Normally, Jonathan's attention was measured, precise, distant. Today, there was warmth. There was awe. There was pride. Maya stood by the sink, pretending not to watch, but her smile betrayed her. It was quiet, almost shy. She knew what this moment meant. She had been a witness to the breakthrough that Jonathan had been too busy or too afraid to create himself. Jonathan stepped closer and ruffled Ethan's hair, careful not to smudge the batter further. "You made these for me?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded, a shy grin spreading across his face. "I wanted to surprise you, like Mom used to." Jonathan froze. His heart thudded painfully as he swallowed hard. Memories came rushing back. Sunday mornings with the smell of vanilla and syrup, the soft hum of old jazz playing in the background, his wife flipping pancakes, and Ethan swinging his legs on the counter, stealing strawberry slices and giggling. He had thought those days were gone forever. That laughter and light had vanished with her. But here it was, alive, in front of him. Jonathan inhaled deeply. He took a seat at the kitchen table, for the first time in years, with his son, just sitting there, sharing pancakes, drinking in the sight of his smiling child. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Jonathan felt normal, human, connected. Ethan handed him a fork, and Jonathan picked up a pancake, hesitating for just a moment before taking a bite. Sweet, warm, slightly uneven, but perfect. Just like the moment. They ate together. They laughed. And Jonathan noticed something he hadn't in a long time. His house was no longer silent. The walls seemed warmer, the marble counter less intimidating, the sunlight streaming in through the kitchen windows more alive. It was as if Ethan's laughter had repaired more than just the soundscape. It had repaired the atmosphere of the house itself. Jonathan glanced at Maya again. She was quietly cleaning the counter, giving them privacy, yet she couldn't hide the gentle pride in her expression. He realized then that she had done something extraordinary. She hadn't just fed his son or kept him occupied. She had brought light into a home he had assumed would remain permanently dark. The thought hit him hard. How had he missed this? How had he let work, grief, and pride push him so far from his son? Ethan looked up at him, eyes sparkling. "Do you like them, Dad?" Jonathan smiled, truly smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling for the first time in years. "I love them, buddy. And I love you. I'm proud of you." Ethan's grin widened, and for a moment, Jonathan thought he might explode from the sheer joy of it. "Can we make these every Sunday?" Ethan asked timidly. Jonathan's throat tightened again. He nodded, even though he had no idea how he would manage it with his schedule. It didn't matter. He would move mountains for this moment. He would carve time from his empire just to sit here with his son. Maya watched silently, sensing the shift not only in Jonathan but in the household itself. She had witnessed something rare, a father reconnecting with his child. Not through gifts, discipline, or lessons, but through presence, shared joy, and the simplicity of pancakes. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving Ethan's face. He felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. The tension of years, the guilt of absence, the pressure of wealth and power, it all melted in the warmth of his son's smile. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine the future differently. A future where he wasn't just a distant father who provided for Ethan, but a present one. A father who cooked breakfast, laughed at silly mistakes, and listened when words didn't come easily. The sound of Ethan giggling at a slightly misshapen pancake was like music Jonathan hadn't realized he had missed. He laughed along, a deep, full laugh, one that seemed to echo in every corner of the house. Jonathan's gaze drifted to Maya once more. She gave him a small nod, almost imperceptible, as if to say, "You did it. You're here now." He realized something he hadn't admitted before. Maya hadn't just taught his son to smile or speak again. She had reminded Jonathan what it meant to be a father, to be human, to be capable of love without conditions, schedules, or rules. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes briefly. He made a silent promise: no more missed mornings, no more absent Sundays, no more distance. From now on, I will be here, with him, with Ethan. Ethan reached across the table and grabbed his father's hand. Jonathan looked down and saw flour smudges on Ethan's tiny fingers. He laughed softly and squeezed back. And in that simple, perfect moment, the warmth, the laughter, the crooked heart-shaped pancakes, Jonathan Hale finally understood that the greatest wealth in the world wasn't money, power, or status. It was this: love, presence, and the joy of seeing your child happy because of you. And it was only the beginning. That night, Jonathan Hale found himself standing in front of Maya's door, hand hovering awkwardly over the knob. He wasn't used to vulnerability. He wasn't used to asking for help. He certainly wasn't used to admitting that he had been failing as a father, failing as a man. He knocked softly, almost hesitantly. Maya opened the door cautiously, her expression a mixture of curiosity and guarded calm. The soft overhead light in the hallway cast a warm glow across her face, making Jonathan realize for the first time how human she truly was, not just a caretaker or an employee, but someone who had walked into their lives and quietly changed everything. He spoke quietly, almost humbly, his voice lacking the authority he was so accustomed to wielding in the boardroom. "I don't want you to leave," he said. "I want you to stay not just as staff, but as someone who helps me learn how to be better for Ethan." Maya blinked, startled. She had been expecting perhaps a reprimand, or at best, a polite word of thanks. Not this. Not an invitation into the center of his family, into the fragile, fractured life of a boy who hadn't smiled in years. "Mr. Hale," she whispered, swallowing hard, "I'm just a maid." "No," Jonathan interrupted firmly, though his voice was quieter than usual, laced with something he hadn't allowed himself to show in decades: honesty. "You're the reason my son smiles again. The reason he speaks. The reason this house feels like a home." He looked down, struggling to reconcile the pride he had always worn like armor with the vulnerability in front of him now. His hands fidgeted slightly, as if the gesture alone could anchor him to the courage he was forcing himself to summon. "I don't know how to do this alone," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to learn." Maya stood there, silent, letting his words sink in. There was no pride, no false humility, no pretense, just raw, unguarded truth. For a moment, the weight of the room pressed in on them both. The expensive marble, the dim light, the quiet hum of the city outside, all framing a single moment of human connection. Finally, Maya nodded. "Then let's learn together." Jonathan exhaled shakily, the tension in his shoulders melting slightly. Relief washed over him, tempered with hope. For the first time in years, he felt that life in this house could change, not through money, rules, or rigid schedules, but through something far more valuable: care, attention, and patience. From that day forward, the dynamic of the Hale household began to shift in subtle yet profound ways. Mornings, once silent and mechanical, became filled with laughter, chatter, and the sound of sizzling pans. Ethan eagerly pulled out ingredients, read instructions aloud, and occasionally threw a flour-covered hand at Jonathan, who would pretend to scold him while secretly laughing. Jonathan, too, changed. He no longer moved through the house like a shadow, lost in work and absent thoughts. He lingered in doorways, asked questions, and offered encouragement. Slowly, tentatively, he allowed himself to connect. And slowly, the walls he had built around his emotions, the ones designed to protect him from grief and fear, began to crumble. Maya became more than a caretaker. She became a bridge between father and son, a quiet, steady presence who knew when to step in, when to step back, and when to simply be there. She guided, supported, and nurtured without ever overstepping, teaching Jonathan lessons he had forgotten or never learned: patience, listening, empathy, and the small, almost imperceptible acts that make a house feel like a home. Ethan blossomed. The laughter that had been absent for years returned, first in small bursts, then in full, uninhibited joy. He started to ask questions, to tell stories, to sit at the table without fear or hesitation. The bond between father and son deepened, nurtured by shared mornings, pancakes, and a woman who had shown them both what it meant to truly care. Jonathan learned that love wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It wasn't about providing everything a child could want. Love was in showing up. Love was in listening, guiding, laughing, and sometimes in stepping back and allowing someone else to teach what he could not. Evenings became calmer, warmer, filled with conversations he never thought he'd have with his son. Homework was done together, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with gentle frustration, but always with attention. Jonathan found himself sitting beside Ethan, holding his hand when he needed reassurance, or ruffling his hair when he made a mistake. And through it all, Maya was there, not as an employee following orders, but as a partner in healing. She taught them routines, introduced small joys, encouraged Ethan's curiosity, and reminded Jonathan to slow down and cherish the moments that truly mattered. The crooked pancakes, once a small act of a child's love, became a symbol of the change in their lives. Imperfect, messy, but made with care and intention. They laughed at the shapes, celebrated the little successes, and learned to find joy in imperfection. Jonathan finally understood something profound. He didn't need to control everything. He didn't need to have all the answers. Sometimes the greatest gift a parent could give a child was simply to be present and to allow others, like Maya, to guide them when they themselves were lost. And sometimes that's all it takes to heal a family. One warm smile, a gentle touch, a plate of badly shaped pancakes. In that household, love began to flow freely again, not forced, not bought, not dictated, but lived, breathed, and shared. Jonathan Hale, the billionaire who had once believed money could solve everything, finally realized the truth. The wealth of a family is measured not in gold, but in the quiet, tender moments that make hearts grow. And in that kitchen, with flour on their hands, syrup dripping down the sides of pancakes, and laughter echoing through the halls, Jonathan, Ethan, and Maya found something richer than any fortune. A home filled with love, hope, and the promise of tomorrow. It wasn't perfect. The pancakes weren't perfect. Their family wasn't perfect. But for the first time in years, it was real. and that was enough.